recycling and also by water conservation. So coming into the environmental impact assessment, an overview of it, where the environment, basically the subject focuses on three aspects, that is the social aspect, environmental aspect and the economical aspects. So coming to the mainly the definition, it is mainly the process to in order to evaluate the potential environmental and the socio-economic impacts of a proposed project or development before it is implemented. And the main goal of this project is to ensure that the decision makers consider the environmental consequences of their actions, leading to more sustainable and responsible development. So these are different kind of goals as we see here. And let's come back a second. Yeah, so let's get back. So three main components what we have to focus on is the social, environmental and the economic aspects. And there are several goals, that is the resource conservation, waste minimization, recovery of the byproduct and efficient use of an equipment or a resource, and sustainable development. So coming into the next one, that is why exactly do we need EIA? Then what are the objectives of EIA? Is to first initially to identify the environmental impact of a proposed project. So once there are impacts, so how to evaluate it? So what are the other methodologies or what are the mitigation methods, how do we evaluate, and based on it mitigation strategies have to be developed. And then further the decision making has to be done by the policy government and policy makers, and ensure the transparency among by public participation and involvement of stakeholders. And if we look into the purpose, what is the main purpose of EIA is mainly to promote the sustainability. So to integrate the environmental considers into decision making process to encourage the sustainable development. So particularly if we look into the economic wise, so any project, maybe it is a construction project or refinery project, it should not affect the economy, it should not affect the community, healthy well-being and the society, the culture, whatever, and the environment, particularly the air, land, water, everything involved into this environmental sector. And the once the issues have been proposed, we have to stop or prevent the environmental degradation by informing the decision makers, that is the government, and to proceed along with the legal and regulatory compliance. So what is the main role of sustainable development and EIA governance in EIA? So basically the sustainable development is to balance the development with the environmental protection. So we have to do it in a proper way. And environmental governments as well, where accountability and transparency should be there among the people, with that of stakeholders as well as the project leaders. All right, if we look into the environmental sustainability development, these are the other areas where every person or a project leader has to look into. That is the efficient use of water, low carbon emissions, sustainable transport option, whole life approach to sustainability of any product, and improved indoor air quality, and minimizing the waste to landfill, and minimal impact on the local environment. So any project which has to be approved should undergo this environmental sustainable development aspects, where all these aspects have to be fulfilled. So coming to the other case studies which we have already reviewed in the previous class, where one is the construction project, the other one is the refinery project, and offshore and onshore solar energy projects. So each such a large scale projects, how it is impacting the environment, what are the focusing areas, what are the mitigation measures and all, we have already discussed. So coming to the main topic, first of all, we will discuss about EIA in depth. So basically, what is EIA? So it is the process of evaluating a project of its environmental consequences, and we have to also look into the plan, policy or program before it is implemented. Okay. And then a tool for a proactive environmental management, which aims to identify and also to mitigate the negative impacts and enhance the positive ones. If there is any negative impact of a project, what could be the preventive measures or what could be the alternative measures of a project need to be identified and need to be mitigated. And it is also the process where the stakeholders and the public participation is the main in the decision making, and it is a main crucial step towards the sustainable development. So if we look into this, mainly the EIA focuses on the transparency, that is the involvement of stakeholders and public participation, certainty of the project, how it is going to be, and participation of the different leaders of different sectors belonging to the environmental belonging to the water resources management sector of different sectors. We will be discussing about this in the next slides. And practicability, how practical is this project going to be, a neutral project or a carbon with less carbon footprint project. So such kind of things should be very practical. And flexibility, if there is any impacts of the project, how the project could be modified or how flexible the project can be in order to implement other mitigation measures. And also the project should be cost effectiveness and economically, it also should provide the local people employment and other things. And creditability and accountability, whether they have to take up the responsible, the project leaders have to take up the responsibility of the impacts what could be caused by the projects. So what exactly is the EIA projects process? So what goes into this report? This is all very important. So EIA reporting is one of the main key concepts where every industry or every company is focusing on these days. So lately there is much importance on this, particularly because in order to attain the sustainable development and also satisfy the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, EIA reporting of any project is very important. So if we know the concept of EIA reporting, then it would be later on stages in each, in further chapters also, we will be looking onto each particular chapter, that environmental aspect, whether it is air, water monitoring, health aspects or socio-economic aspects, whatever it is, we will be looking into depth. But before going into that, we have to understand exactly what goes into this EIA report. So if there is a project, okay, any project, be it a construction or a refinery or any project, large scale projects, particularly the road laying or anything as such. So first we need is the project description. So this project description means takes up the main uh, stand, where details of every tiny and minute details of the project has to be disclosed during the reporting process. So after the each and minute every aspect is disclosed, then further the baseline studies will be conducted. As and when the study, the project discloses about the site or the location where exactly the project will be implemented, the documents of the findings of the EIA study need to be collected. So what will be the documented studies? Basically, it relates to the environmental data. So what are the environmental data? The present scenario of the society, like where exactly the project is going to start. For example, if it is a place where exactly the construction site, near to this construction site, 2 3 kilometers surrounding, every monitoring of environmental data has to be considered, whether it is water resources or nearby lake bodies or atmospheric, that is air, how what is the condition of the air, what is the condition of the groundwater. Every small details will be looked into this baseline studies. So let's go into depth. What will be the key scenarios for this base studies? So key scenarios, particularly project with potential for pollution, that is the mining operation, be it the industrial facilities and wastewater treatment plants. So these baseline studies establish the existing levels of air, So air pollution monitoring, water pollution monitoring, soil pollutants, and allowing the detection of any project related contamination. So water, if the wastewater is getting discharged, so what will be the condition of the water, what will be the quality of the water, that and all will be disclosed. And what will be the projects affecting the water resources, that is the dam, irrigation projects. So how could dam and irrigation projects affect the environment? Because of the sedimentation process. Sedimentation, again we will look into this. So sedimentation is the main problem for the dam, which does not allow the fish migration, or the settlement mainly causes the absorption, water absorption into the groundwater recharge, all these. So the air quality, so air quality as in how the power plants release the toxic chemicals into the air, which is again causes the respiratory problems, and human well-being, healthy well-being of the mankind is very difficult. And other transportation projects, whether it is a metro rail or MMTS or bus transport, trams, whatever, the transportation projects also, how it actually affects the environment should also be um, considered. And this industrial emissions, the air quality, so all these also are the uh, projects which have potential impact of pollution on the environment. The soil quality, if you look into the soil quality, particularly the mining, construction, and agricultural activities also affect the projects, the environment. And what is the main purpose of the baseline studies? Mainly to establish the pre-project environmental conditions. Before the implementation of the project, what are the existing environmental conditions have to be monitored, to provide a basics for predicting and to assess the potential impact further in the future after the implementation of the project, and to also to enable the monitoring of the project impacts during the construction and operation, and evaluate the mitigation measures. So first, initially the pre-project environmental conditions will be monitored, and also it will be predicted for and assessed for the future purposes. And also it keeps monitoring of these baseline studies, allow us to monitor the project impacts during the construction and operation, and also to evaluate the mitigation measures. So there are different EIA process as we look into this. One is the screening, impact mitigation, scoping, reporting, baseline studies as we have already discussed, the decision making, impact analysis, implementation, and monitoring. These are basically the key stages of EIA. If we look into the each process particularly, first we will be starting with the screening. So screening is the after performing the baseline studies, we will be coming to know whether the projects can be further evaluated or it can be stopped. So for this project, for this process, screening is at most important. And during the screening level, large scale, particularly large scale development projects such as mining, refineries, industries, dams, all these are big scale projects, will be screened to determine if the impact assessment of the environment is necessary or not. If necessary, what is the next step? So these will be the screening aspects. So key scenarios will be that mainly the large scale development projects, the construction of dams, reservoirs, large scale infrastructure, mining operation, refinery, and other resource intensive activities, industrial power stations, and other manufacturing facilities. So if you look into this picture, so first step after the baseline studies is the screening. We will be screening based on the impact what will be caused for the by the project. Next, the environmental examination will be performed, and then the review will be performed. By review will be done by the stakeholders, government leaders, and policymakers, and these people will be reviewing the screening process. Once the project is if it is a small level projects, then EIA is not required. But if these review people think that the this big scale project have will be having a considerable amount of environmental impact, then EIA will be required, for which another step, which is the scoping step, will be performed. So we will come back to this picture again. So let's go to the next step now, the scoping process. So this scoping process identifies the environmental issue. So in this project, in this step mainly, for the screening, they will decide whether the project can be implemented or not. But in the second process, that is the scoping process, it will identify the environmental issues. So there will be certain number of people or the experts of belonging to different environmental sectors. They will be identifying the different environmental issues. So whether it is air pollution or water pollution, and whatever the environmental groundwater recharging, all these also aspects also will be considered as a part of scoping. So projects identified as required in screening level. All right. This specific areas of concern will be discussed. So mainly the complex projects with multiple potential impacts would include these dams, highway, airports, which have various environmental and social aspects will be coming into this process. And if it is about industrial developments, particularly the mining and chemical plants with potential for air and water and soil pollution, these aspects are mainly involved and reported. So, what could be the impacts? So, how these impacts will be analyzed? So, initially, we have to identify by having the pre project analysis. By doing the pre project analysis, we will be coming to know the baseline studies, that is, the existing environmental impact. And then further, we have to also predict and also to identify and evaluate the potential environmental inputs. And these scenarios mainly implemented, the key scenarios for the impact analysis would be urban development projects. So for suppose it is a large residential, that is 40-storied buildings, like these days there are multi-storied buildings which are causing severe troubleshoot for the groundwater recharging or groundwater depletion and all this. So particularly like large residential commercial developments, which can impact the utilities and also the traffic management and the green spaces. Wherever there is a green lot or a green infrastructure provided by the government is actually occupied, and then these projects will be implemented, and by which the impact will be assessed for that this kind of urban development projects. So the impact analysis assess the impacts on the local community. So what could be the impacts, whether it is a noise pollution, air pollution, water pollution, and sound pollution. All these are also other impacts which actually affects the local communities, the infrastructure, and the environmental quality. So what could be the mitigation measures? So once we know which type of project it is, how it is impacting the environment, so we have to also look into the mitigations measures. So these mitigation measures are the developing strategies to minimize the negative impact. All right. See, these mitigation measures develop the strategies in order to think like how to minimize the impact effects. For example, if it is a large building, so they produce a large amount of noise. So noise will be the main cause and impact. And how the mitigation measures, if it is noise, then noise barriers can be used, or or can be used those equipments which produces less amount of noise. And if it is air, by putting the green sheets, in that way also the green screens, particularly if we put those screens, air also, by having the tiny silt particles or the dust particles, will not be like this disturbed sorry distributed into the air and reach the local communities. So these are the mother mitigation measures. So mm, mainly the key scenarios, if we look into with negative impacts are the construction projects, that is road construction, particularly that is mitigation of for noise, dust, soil erosion, and habitat disruption. If it is factories, implementing the pollution control technologies to reduce the air and water emissions. If it is miners, the mitigation measure is to measure the restored mine land and manage waste rock, and also to control the water pollution. And through this mining sectors only, major amount of heavy metals like arsenic and lead, these are the main hazardous chemicals present in the mining area, which will be ultimately when water is flushed out, and it will be reaching the water nearby water bodies, thereby contaminating the water and making it eutrophic with lead pollution, which ultimately leading to the unhealthy which also affects the health well-being. And what are the purpose of these mitigation measures? There are several purposes. So without any mitigation of these impacts, the project cannot be involved, and there will be a simple a very huge impact on the human well-being. So first one is to avoid the preventing impacts altogether by altering the project design or the location. So the purpose of avoidance is that in order to avoid the air pollution, for example, okay, so once the sand, silt, dust, fine dust particles, which causes the respiratory problems in human and mankind, how it can be done? It can be avoided. But in order to avoid it completely, what could be the other mitigation measures? By altering the project design, like by using the other as I told you, the green screens, and location as well, far from the local communities, that kind of things. Instead of main hugely populated urban areas, instead of choosing that kind of location, maybe little isolated. And minimization, how do you minimize? By reducing the magnitude or extent of impact. Rectification, by repairing or restoring the damaged environment. Reduction, reduction by reducing the impacts over time. And compensation, offsetting the unavoidable impacts through the compensatory measures by habitat restoration, carbon offset, and carbon footprint, you say water footprints. So mainly this large scale buildings that this multi-storied buildings, particularly 40 floors, 50 floors, that this kind of multi-layered, multi-storied buildings can be compensated by reusing the water, or habitat restoring, that is by restoring this like wastewater treatment and reuse of water. All this also comes under this. And by using the solar panels for the energy conservation, and all these things can also be done as a compensation. And carbon credits, in order to reduce the carbon credit, more amount of carbon emissions, that can be reduced by increasing more amount of plantations. So in such way, the compensation measures can be performed. So coming to the fifth one, that is the reporting. So reporting is the one which will be mainly used done by the stakeholders. So engaging the stakeholders. Stakeholders are the ones which are mainly plays the main role in this EIA process, and decides whether the project can be further implemented or not. The stakeholders decide. So engaging the stakeholders and gathering the feedback. So the project requiring the regulatory approval will be the mainly the involvement of the government agencies, the regulatory bodies, which require the detailed reports to make the informed decision about the project approval and the permits, depending upon the project type. So, what are the public consultation and participation? So, public consultation is that to maintain the transparency among the people, or among the local public, about the reports which are essential, and to know with the public and stakeholders, and also the people who will be affected in a community, whether it is a small scale or a big scale community. They also provide a platform for transparency, and also allow the feedback and input. So this reporting, so they will be like everything will be enclosed, like disclosed, whether if it is the impacts, how could be the mitigation measures, everything will be disclosed. And further, the reporting will be done by the stakeholders by involving the other government agencies and everyone to make the informed decision about the project. Further, the public consultation will also be done for in their participation to provide the information necessary to the affected communities, and also to keep transparency of the project to the local community and to allow the feedback and input. For example, if you look into the projects with significant environmental impacts and environmental audits, so the reports which are used during the environmental audits to assess a project's environmental performance and identify the areas for improvement. Purpose of reporting studies. So, what is the main purpose of these reporting studies? To document the EIA process and the findings and communicate the environmental information to the stakeholders, and also to provide a basics for the decision making and ensuring the transparency and accountability, and also to facilitate the public participation. So once in order we get the huge data about the project, the decision will be making will be done by the stakeholders. Further, the transparency among the local community and the public participation is done, and also the accountability will be taken place in order to facilitate the public participation, and also to support the environmental monitoring and compliance, and to create a lasting record of the environmental assessment. So this is the main purpose and purpose of reporting, which comes under EIA process. So finally, the decision makers. So reporting and all is done, the purpose, everything is clear, and then now the decision making is the crucial step to further implement the project. So now, who are the decision making authorities? So mainly the authorities will decide whether the project has to be approved or not. So who are the decision making? Again, the public policy holders and business head, government agencies, stakeholders, and other government regulatory bodies are the decision makers. All right. So how this decision making is important in each stage, how the EIA review is being done at each stage of process. So the screening in the initial stage, the screening whether the proposed project requires a full or a partial EIA, and then it also involves the judging of the potential significance of the project's environmental impacts. It has to be judging. So mainly the decision is based on whether the EIA is required or not, and also to judge the significance of the impacts. And factors mainly include for the screening stage the decision for which to be made. These are the main factors, that is the project size, where exactly the project location will be performed, and the nature of the project, what kind of project it is, construction, mining, refinery, what sector it belongs to, and what could be the environmental regulations and thresholds, and potential for public concern. So these three are the major factors which are required for the decision made making for the first level. Coming to the second stage, that is scoping stage. How this decision making is involved in this scoping stage. So as we discussed, scoping identifies the environmental impacts. So the decision making is important by defining the boundaries and focus of the EIA study, and also to determine which environmental and social issues come into prioritization. All right. So, what are the boundaries and what is the focus? If it is industry, we have to look into mainly the air and water, particularly for its discharge. So, what will be the boundaries? How that can be mitigated? So, these are the decision things, and the factors which are mainly to be focused for the decision making, that is the stakeholder input and concerns, potential impacts identified during the preliminary assessments, and the available resources and the expertise. So coming to the third aspect, that is the impact analysis stage. So this impact analysis stage. So once the impacts has been identified and the decision, sorry, the stakeholders or the decision makers after the identification of the impacts in the scoping stage and how the impact analysis, the decision uh, plays a major role in this impact analysis, we will see by selecting the appropriate methodologies for impact prediction and assessment, and also to evaluate the significance of identified impacts. So first, in order to select the proper methodologies, so we will be looking into the proper methodologies in the further slides, that is in the second chapter particularly. So there are different kind of methodology in order to assess the impact. Always, how do you impact is the kind of methodology what we adopt, whether it is adopt ad hoc methodology or checklist or matrices, network. These are the other different methodologies how we predict the environmental impact. So in order to impact analysis, to do the impact analysis, we have to select the decision makers play a major role in selecting the appropriate, correct methodology for the impact prediction and assessment. If it is a small scale project, different kind of methodology has to be implemented. If it is a larger scale, different method. Or if it is an old villages or something, different kind of methodologies. If it is a regularized or in a modern cities or modern localities, different kind of methodology has to be implemented. So there is a procedure or a methodology which has to be appropriately selected based on the location and size of the project for the prediction, for impact prediction and assessment. And second one is the evaluating the significance of the identified impacts. So once the impact has been evaluated, that let us say if it is a wastewater or the pharmaceutical industry which is releasing huge amount of wastewater into the local water body, because that is the only where the pollutants can be diluted with the other regulatory, sorry, with other water body. So once it is released, we have to identify, and also we have to understand the significance of the impact. So once it reaches the local water body, that is contaminated. Once the local water body is contaminated, whether it is a presence of odor or because of the presence of the dead fishes, because of the toxic level of the water, the fishes will be extinct, they will be died, and there will be no proper treatment for it. So that kind of significance is there, and odor, the turbidity, aesthetically also it doesn't seem good, and which are ultimately leading to the impact on the healthy atmosphere of the mankind as well. And also to determine the acceptable levels of risk. If it is a water pollution, and what are the major water quality analysis to be performed. So different analysis, that is whether the turbidity, if it is of um, which should be of acceptable range, that is of certain level, which will be given by the Bureau of Indian Standards. Based on these standards only, the water evaluation, water quality analysis will be performed, and also it should be of acceptable range. And what are these factors which are mainly useful for the decision makers to decide about the project are the scientific data and the models available, and the expert judgment and experience. So who are the expertise here? So the basically the water specialist if it is a water related project, or the groundwater experts if it is related to the mining projects, or air quality experts if it is related to the air quality like emissions and all this, and the regulatory standards and guidelines. These are the ones which have to be like every project has to follow the government body protocol, like whatever the government will be establishing a certain regulatory standards and guidelines, the project has to undergo through this. So if there is any deviation, the project will not be identified. So these are the three factors which makes the experts or the stakeholders will uh, decide whether the scoping process and impact analysis stage has to be further considered for the mitigation only. So coming to the mitigation measure state, where the decision makers will be mainly choosing the most effective mitigation measure to minimize or eliminate the adverse impact. So we have to choose the effective mitigation measures to eliminate or the adverse impact. So determining the feasibility and effectiveness of different mitigation options. So for example, if it is an industry or a pharmaceutical for sale, then pharmaceutical industry, if it releases more amount of its toxic waste, so pharmaceutical wastewater is more of with contaminants like nutraceuticals will be present, cosmetoceuticals will be present, or any toxic methods and toxic chemicals, and so antibiotics, whatever it is, the pharmaceutical, so these chemicals will be included into the wastewater. So once it gets discharged into the local water body, there will be an potential impact on the water body. So how do you mitigate it? So we have to mitigate. So every pharmaceutical company should possess their own treatment facility. So either the primary, secondary, or the treatment of tertiary treatment is required in order to uh, water discharge before it directly contaminates the local water body. So this is the kind of mitigation measure. So after performing the tertiary level of treatment of pharmaceutical waste, and after the removal of the toxic chemicals, cosmeceutical heavy metals, all these, after the removal of these, only then when it is safe and of appropriate levels of acceptance, only then the water can be discharged into the local water body. And the odor turbidity also have to be focused so that it will not affect the local communities as well. And also, so this is the mitigation measures for the pharmaceutical industries, for example, I said, and determining the feasibility and cost effectiveness of the different mitigation measures. For example, if the same pharmaceutical company doesn't have the treatment facilities, so what could be the feasibility and what could be the alternate measures for its treatment? So for this, the wastewater can be carried to the main water treatment site location. So there will be some industrial wastewater treatment sites where different wastewater from different sectors will be collected and transported to the particular industrial wastewater treatment location where it can be treated simultaneously. So we have to determine the feasibility and alternative mitigation measures. All right. So that is the thing, and we should also look into the cost effectiveness. Cost effectiveness, as in whether we have to decide whether the transporting and other challenges during the transportation is cost effective, or to perform its own treatment at its own local site inside the industries. So that and all have to be determined, and also to establish the monitoring and the compliance requirements. The whole set of things has to be monitored in a particular way for these mitigation measures. So these things contribute to the decision makers, for which they will be like further the project can be continued or to be stopped. So these are the stages where it helps the decision makers to focus on it. And the other factors mainly are the impact analysis findings, technological feasibility, economic consideration, and stakeholders' preferences. These are also the factors which mainly focuses on the decision makers to further approve it. So, what are the other two stages? That is the reporting stage and the approval stage. So, once and all the impact has been, like the screening has been done, the decision has been approved, and then further in the scoping level also the impacts have been identified, and then that is also approved. Then again the analysis stage, the impacts have been identified, the analysis, and then mitigation, all these where the stakeholders has already approved. Now further for the reporting, how the stakeholders or the decision makers play a major role. They play a major role by determining how the present EIA findings in a clear and understandable manner is present or not. So they will determine how the till now, like till the medication measures, how the EIA reporting has been done. These are all the different EIA findings, well, involving the air, water, socio-economic aspects, biological aspects, and biodiversity aspects. So there are different aspects and uh, indicators where every aspect by involving the main subject experts, they will be writing a report on it. Then how these findings are clear and understandable manner in order to implement a project. So this is the main step for the decision makers in order to do the reporting to be more clear and highlighting each key impact and its mitigation measures. If it is a construction project, mainly the noise because of the drilling, because of other aspects. So mainly this is the main noise pollution also, which also affects the local communities and health as well. So what is the high, if it, let us say if it is a key impact, for example, for this construction noise thing. So how do we mitigate? So mitigation measures are by using the noise barriers or the using such equipment which produces very less noise. So these are the ones, are changing the location. So these are the ones of the mitigation measures. So these have to be highlighted in order to do the reporting of the EI. And what is the main factors which allows the decision makers to do this reporting? We have to mainly key focus on the target audience, that is whether it is public or it is the stakeholders or regulators, that is the government bodies, or the investors, or the business head, who are the business investors or the project investors. So these are the main target audiences which will be like aware of all the impacts and the mitigation measures, how it is going to be reported, how the transparency of the project will be done, for the public participation and everything will be done. And the second factor for this reporting will be the legal and regulatory requirements. So each and every factor has to be along according to the uh, um, according to the government body as well. And the transparency and the accountability, the transparency should be among the stakeholders, the decision makers, and the public involvement. So these are the factors which allows the key decision holders to make a report on EIA of of a particular project. So the last one is the project approval stage. For this project approval, so once the project is established, every small detail has been enclosed, and the what could be the impacts of it, what could be the mitigation measures of it, how it is reported by involvement, how the transparency is there. Once everything is clear cut, then the project has to be approved, for which again whether to approve or modify or reject the proposed project based on this decision. So these decision holders are the major ones, plays a major role to decide whether the project has to be approved or to modify, or also to even reject the proposed project if it is a major impact and there is no much alternative or feasible mitigation measures included. So, what would be the other ones? The setting conditions for the project approval, including the mitigation and monitoring requirements. Is any of these projects are inappropriately disclosed, then there is a decision makers will reject the project based on the information provided. And what are the other factors which allows the decision holders to approve the project are the EIA findings and recommendation, and socio-economic considerations, political and public pressures. So based on these three factors, the project will be approved, and which has to be again decided by the decision makers. So these are the different EIA process at different levels where the decision making is very important. So coming to the implementation project. So once the decision is made throughout the process, the project will be implemented. So once the project is implemented, we have to track the project's environmental performance. So as we will be already having the pre-project environmental conditions or baseline studies, so based on it, the environmental performance of the present project will be tracked down. So, how it is concluded? By doing the environmental project management plan. So, EMP, it is a very critical component of EIA. So, once it is approved, EIA reporting is done, EIA is proposed to a particular project, and once the project is approved, the project will be monitored, implemented and monitored. And how it is monitored? By doing this environmental management plan, so outlining the mitigation measures and monitoring protocols. So everything will be outlined. In specific, it specifies how these environmental impacts will be addressed during all the project phases. For example, we have discussed about air, we have discussed about noise. For example, coming back, if it is air, for suppose, so airs, as I told you, for the big storage buildings or a large project, the green screens will be kept in order to distract or in order to inhibit the air pollutants, that is fine dust particles or the silt pollutants, flying or dispersed or distributed into the environment. So this is one aspect. So these all will be addressed in a proper appropriately. So construction, mainly the noise, and how it can be addressed by using noise barriers. If it is a large storage building, how does it affect the groundwater? Because by depleting the groundwater resources, as major portion of it can be withdrawal. So that is how that how can it be addressed? By not digging well deep into the earth, but getting transported from other water resources or reusing the water by the wastewater